All right, let's talk a little bit about the case, the Salesforce initiative. And this brief reflection is basically a summary of what I would expect you to analyze in the case. So it's pretty much kind of the teaching note, but it can be used as a reflection after you have analyzed the case yourself. So usually I like to start with issues that you can see in any case. So I'm going to start with issues in the case here as well. And the case is quite a tricky one because it seems to direct you or focus your attention to the sales team. The sales team and the sales issue, as the title of the case might suggest, the Salesforce initiative, is something that is distracting for me because it is obviously an issue to deal with the sales team, and you can do that. And it might be interesting to analyze the case from this angle, but usually I like to analyze the case from a different angle. I like to observe the underlying structure of relationships between the different protagonists in the case. Mr. Müller, the only person who is addressed throughout the whole case with his last name, which shows, from my point of view, one of the issues of the case. Then we have Angela, the COO, who is the informal leader, from my point of view, which is another issue in the case, and we will get back to Angela in a couple of minutes. And Julie, the counselor, the puppet master, who is another informal leader in the case. And we could probably talk about the son of Mr. Müller, who is some kind of an informal leader to be, probably in the mind of some people. That's another thing we are going to talk about. So in the end, the focus on the sales team and the sales initiative is a bit distracting for me in the case and probably leads you away from analyzing the deeper structures of relationships that I find particularly interesting. But nevertheless, if you decide to focus in a class on the sales strategy, why not? That's an absolutely valid idea how to use the case. So let's take a look back to the issues in the case. For me, one of the core issues and one of the big problems is that the owner seems to be very much disconnected with the business. He's drinking quite a lot, he's eating quite a lot, and there are several moments in the case where I thought, oh boy, is this guy having a drinking problem? And we will get back to the owner. So the owner seems to be disconnected with the business is one of the main problems from my point of view. The business, of course, is changing, and the old corporate structure or strategy does not seem to fit here and now anymore. That's another problem. A third problem is that there are too many responsibilities for the COO. So Angela is doing quite a lot. And if you take a look at the org structure, you will see how many things she has on her plate. And it seems like she tries to save the company by heavily investing in sales, and that investment might have been too big. But what is the right measure here? That is something you can definitely discuss. The next issue is, after the investment in sales might have been too big, that there is no trust in controlling and in the numbers, but more trust in the counselor, specifically by Mr. Müller, who is the one who finally has to decide. And there seems to be a culture of neglectance. And what is the impact of this neglectance, of this culture of neglectance for the future of the organization? The next issue that we see is, and I already mentioned that there are three leaders, at least three leaders. The formal one, the owner, then the puppet master who pulls the strings behind the scenes, which is Julie, the counselor, and the informal leader who leads by expertise and acceptance, which is Angela. And interesting enough for me is that there is at least one formal leader who doesn't seem to play a role at all, who is the CFO. So you don't hear anything about the CFO. And by the way, you don't hear anything about HR in the case as well. And overall, the roles are very much unclear besides the formal structure. And for me, the case is a very extreme example of a mismatch between formal and informal structure, which is quite interesting to analyze as well. So what I would like to do now is to go through some of the main characters of the case and reflect a little bit what I think is interesting looking at them, and then conclude with options for the whole system. And as I said in the beginning, it would be interesting for me if you manage to dig really deep and try to read between the lines in the case. So let's take a look at the owner, Mr. Müller. And for me personally, I think the owner is not a leader. Everything rests on the shoulders of the COO, who is the informal leader. And that creates an imbalance in the organization. It is okay if it is accepted and if every side is okay with that, but it might lead to certain problems, like acceptance problems of the owner, who is of course very powerful because of the ownership of the organization, but at the same time he's not accepted in the role by the employees, and he might feel that. One of the problems might be that Loic, Mr. Müller, is not educated in the industry and that he had no time to gain the experience. And that might have led to insecurity, and the insecurity to reliability on one person, the counselor. She seems to be very, very helpful. And she also tries, consciously or unconsciously, at least I think that is the impact that she has on Mr. Müller, she disconnects him with the organization. And it's a bit like the king's new clothes phenomenon. Things are going wrong, and she's trying to protect him from these bad feelings, this bad pressure. It's a bit like he's the child of her, and that creates that keeps him in a state of neglectance, being incapable of seeing things. Even if the head of controlling the cannery, and we will talk about him later, shows exactly what's going wrong here. So I already mentioned that the owner is referred to as Mr. all the time, while all others in the case are mentioned with their first name, and that should indicate a certain distance between the organization and the owner. I already mentioned the head of controlling, who tried to explain the numbers to him, to Mr. Müller, but he said that he doesn't understand them. And by the way, very often students find it very hard to believe that Mr. Müller does not see the numbers, but it seems like he doesn't want to see the numbers, which is interesting if we look at it from an angle of social or ego defense mechanisms, like denying things. And by the way, that could be an interesting link to the change curve of Kübler-Ross, that Mr. Müller is either in the denial or in the stability phase and doesn't want to see that change is happening. And also think about the change frameworks that you might have seen so far, that there is a need for change has to be created. And how would you like to do that if not with numbers? And if you do it with numbers and people don't believe in numbers, is change even possible? So again, getting back to the owner, Mr. Müller, and his experience or non-experience and no formal training in the industry. And I know, due to this, he was very insecure when making decisions. And that is what people sometimes realize. So he seems to make decisions that are not logic anymore. And they only accept his opinion because he was the owner of the company. And if you are so insecure, obviously, you are very open to influence by someone like Julie. And if you would like to link Mr. Müller back to theory and his behavior back to theory, he's leading the organization based on the pleasure principle, contrary to the rationality principle. That's a piece of theory that you can use within the case to describe what's going on. And I already mentioned his potential alcohol problem that he probably has, and the defense mechanisms like denial. In a way, and for me to conclude the reflection on the owner is that the highest person in the hierarchy sends the worst signal. He sends the signal, "I don't care," and I'm wondering how fast this will erode the motivation and the impact of the culture of the whole organization. So as the next person, let's take a look at the counselor, Julie, who is for a very, very long time in the company. And I'm wondering why this is the case, because she has a troubled, let's say, troublesome journey within the organization. And why is she still there? She was degraded. And why is she still there after she had been degraded from the board during another change process? For me, there can be several reasons. Either she's very strong and has very strong commitment to the company, and doesn't want to leave. She just wants to serve the company. Or is she not so good that another company would hire her? So how good is she really? Another perspective could be, a third one, is it so easy for her in the company now? So could it be that she stayed because of the informal power that she had gained? And still, I'm wondering, would she be able to make it in another organization? Probably not. Otherwise, she would or should have left, at least from my point of view. But that might be my value that is interfering with the reflection of the case. So that is a part of me that I bring into the reflection of the case. And Julie interferes very much with controlling and the managers to beat facts with insinuations. So she basically tells the emperor that his clothes are absolutely beautiful, disconnects him from the organization, and gets into a conflict with the others. And based on the trust of the owner to her, she is being protected by him. Sometimes it's quite interesting. Some students think that Julie and the CEO have an intimate relationship, but that's not the case, or that wasn't the case. Julie just knows how to manipulate well in her very regular informal Jew-fix meetings with the CEO. So she had direct access to the source of power, so to speak, and she was able to use that. Another thing, and that's a difference between Julie and Angela, so between the counselor and the CEO, is what they communicate. Julie usually communicates that everything is fine. So the world is beautiful, the world is at ease and no stress at all. While Angela is very pessimistic and usually brings the bad news and different issues to the table, which obviously is not very good. So here is this don't kill the messenger idea that comes into the case, but the messenger here is probably being killed. And Julie used the insecurity of the owner to influence him in a way that fits her personal goal most. So she is, and I said that in the beginning, that there is a lot of power that she has gained in the organization. It's going quite well for her in the organization. And maybe it's not because of out of a bad intentions. She probably thinks that she should do it that way. And she seems to be one of the informal leaders of the organization, the master of puppets. She's pulling the strings behind the scenes. And as I said, she separates the CEO even more, having conflicts with nearly everyone in the organization. And she keeps him in a bubble where everything is not that bad or doesn't seem to be that bad. And I'm still wondering, does she see him as her child, trying to protect him in a way? But that would be a weird consideration because she's not that much older than the CEO. So let's take a look at Angela, the COO. And one thing that is very obvious for me, if you look at the org chart, you will see that the COO, that Angela has far too many tasks to focus on. If you look at the org chart, I'm wondering how many beloved children does she have? That's another theoretical concept that you can discuss within the case. So there are a lot of habits, and can she let go of tasks? Or does she like to do so many things? Obviously, she has a very strong commitment to the company, and it's kind of her baby. This is what she can focus on. She has no real family. She has no kids, so no one she has to take care of in the rest of her life. So basically, she can live quite often or quite continuously for the organization, with all the benefits and downsides that will be attached to that. And I'm wondering if she hopes to become the CEO herself one day. And as I said, she usually communicates the things that are difficult, complex, and are bad news, which is probably not so good from the perspective of the owner. At least every time the owner sees her, he probably thinks, already knows that something bad is going to be communicated. So she also seems like an informal leader of the organization, like Julie is, but she is more visible than Julie. However, I would say that she has less influence than Julie, at least considering the direct influence on the owner. Probably from a business perspective, Angela has more impact than Julie has, but not in the relationship between the individual and the owner. And I mentioned The Emperor's New Clothes a couple of times. And in the story of The Emperor's New Clothes, there is one child who is allowed to speak up because the child is not socialized in a way that it knows what is appropriate behavior and what is inappropriate behavior. And sometimes Angela reminds me about the child in The Emperor's New Clothes, and she being the one who is showing the others the elephant in the room. And is she hated because of that? I'm also a bit concerned about the health of Angela. She's traveling a lot, and it seems like she can handle it quite well, stress-wise, from her stamina. But beware, if she becomes seriously ill, that will be a major problem for the company. And no one seems to listen to HR about that as a canary in that angle, shedding light on that issue. And if Angela, again, if she gets a health problem and cannot serve the company anymore, that will be a major issue because she's pulling all the strings and keeps the business running, as it seems. Let's take a look at another person very briefly, the head of controlling, and I mentioned him a couple of times. He's serving as the canary as well, like HR is serving as a canary for the health issues of Angela that seem to go on for quite some while because they have very irregular or seldom meetings with the CEO and they constantly bring it up. So it seems to go on like that a couple of years already. And the head of controlling also serves as a canary. But no one sees the signs, or they neglect the signs. And his boss, the boss of the head of controlling, the CFO, from my point of view, should support him, but does not do it. At least it does not become clear in the case. And that might lead or indicate a very weak CFO, or to someone who has given up already. Think about learned helplessness. People have learned that if they say something, if they speak up, it doesn't make a difference anyway. So the organization becomes silent. And these are two other theoretical concepts that you can use in your reflection: organizational silence and learned helplessness. So he's quiet. He's not very present, not present at all in the case, and probably because he cannot stand against Julie, the counselor, to do anything. And if you draw an interplay of the people, if you take a look at the relationships that are interwoven, you will see that Julie, the counselor, has very much the trust of the CEO and influences him very much, while the CEO does not trust the head of controlling. And Julie has conflicts with anyone in the company, with everyone, with the head of controlling, with Angela, with the department heads, and so on. And that Angela has, again, too many things going on. She has issues with the performance of the head of sales, which is a completely other perspective on the case that we can probably discuss later on. And I already mentioned the many issues that she had to deal with, which becomes apparent if you take a look at the org structure. And she also has to take care of Pierre and Ines, the children of the owner. And probably she's preparing them, at least Pierre, for taking over the organization. And since I mentioned the sales initiative a couple of times, and this is the title of the case, of course, let's take a look at that a little bit. I'm wondering here if the head of sales was promoted too early. He was a very good salesperson, but obviously that does not make a very good leader. And here I recommend the case, the new CRM system, to take a look in depth about a head of sales who is not in his role yet. The other thing that is a problem here is that the salary structure in the team seems to to be imbalanced. At least it is not based on the time in the company, as it seems if you look at the salary chart in the appendix of the case. But it's quite, I mean, it's not obvious, but it's understandable why there is this imbalance, because it's based on experience. Also, those in the company who were hired recently have a larger salary than those who are already in the company for some time, which is often the case because if you hire people, external people, you usually pay more than if you grow people in the organization. But nevertheless, that leads to a huge imbalance in the team, which might cause motivational issues when people find out. And there are, if you take a look at the differences in the team Zurich, for example, you will see that they're basically doing the same job but getting paid very much differently. And that can become a major issue and erode trust in the organization and commitment to the organization. But anyhow, the sales team for me is just a sideshow in the case. It's not irrelevant. I totally agree to that. But when I teach the case, it is not the main focus that I have. For me, it seems to be an initiative by Angela to increase the sales team and to focus on the sales team, because this is what she can influence and actually do to change the system. It seems to be her only viable choice, while the other options, like clarifying roles, solve conflicts, are more difficult, if not impossible, and have a less tangible impact. So I'm wondering if she is seduced by the hope of the numbers generated by sales and at the same time neglecting the real issues, like Loic and other people in the case. So if we are taking a look at the organizational structure, and I already mentioned that, and we can keep it very brief, there are way too many people reporting to the COO nationally and internationally, but also in the sales department. If you look at the sales department, it's basically a mirror of the issue on the larger organizational scale. There are too many people who are reporting to the head of sales. But the problem is, if we would solve both things, like, for example, adding an organizational layer. First of all, it's not very popular because organizations tend to reduce hierarchies and not to increase another layer of hierarchy. But if they would do that and change the reporting lines a little bit, that will lead to increased personal expenses. And I'm wondering if these increase of personal expenses make sense in the current financial situation of the organization. So what has to be done first? So maybe implement a head of Swiss organization and have regional heads for international subsidiaries and have team leads in sales and so on. But again, that would make the financial situation worse, and I don't know if it makes sense to do that in this moment in the case. But these are definitely some options for Angela. And there are the obvious ones, like firing the head of sales, which probably doesn't make too much sense because you need a head of sales. So you basically replace one person with another. And if you change the head of sales, you will definitely have an issue for a couple of months, motivational issues, and so on and so forth. And you cannot be sure probably that the new person will fix the issues that the current person has. At least he or she will definitely not be able to fix the organizational problem in sales. Then you can probably implement a general manager for Switzerland, which again leads to personal costs, but take away some of the burden from Angela, which would make sense in a way. But again, that would lead to another implication. The people who reported to Angela so far are not allowed to report to her anymore, and they have to report to the GM Switzerland, which can lead to a certain dynamic because they are cut off from Angela, and they probably don't like that. So that's something you can think about, the pros and cons about implementing a general manager in Switzerland, and also implementing regional heads. That's basically the same issue, and overall it's increased personnel costs, and I'm not sure if the organization is yet capable to manage these type of costs. And I don't know if Angela wants to get rid of some responsibilities. From my point of view, she has to. There are some other options for Angela, like leaving the company, trying to gain more influence onto Mr. Müller or fire Julie. But for me, they don't really make sense. I think Angela does not want to leave the company. So, I mean, that's a theoretical idea, but it won't happen. Also, trying to gain more influence to Mr. Müller is also an idea, but also basically impossible, because you need trust to get it, and it's impossible to sideline Julie. Firing Julie is sometimes an idea that students bring up, but it's not possible, at least not in this constellation. Take a look at the org chart and you will see that Julie is basically sitting next to the owner. So Angela has no chance to fire her. In the best case, I mean, in the worst case, Julie is considered to be on a higher hierarchical level. For me, she's standing outside of the hierarchical level in a way. And in the best case, Julie and Angela are peers, so Angela cannot fire Julie in that situation. So finally, what is the recommendation? So what is the idea? How to solve that? And as usual in a lot of my cases, this is, I would call it a multi-morbid organization. There are so many issues that are going on that you have to focus on the worst issues and have to figure out what to do. And for me, the only potential solution would be to convince Mr. Müller to retire from the day-to-day business and to let the organization do its work. In which form, however, you are planning to do that. You can create an advisory board, or you can change the legal organizational structure so that he's not involved in the day-to-day business anymore, but still gets the money that is created in the organization. And then that Angela could step in as a CEO or as an interim CEO. She basically does the work anyways. But that would require her to let go of some tasks, at least of some tasks. So you have to reorganize the structure. And if she would be the CEO, it would also be easier to fire Julie as one option. And we have to discuss whether this option is really a good option or if that would just be the easy option. And another positive aspect of Angela being the CEO might be an idea to prepare the son to step in after her, because he wants to do that, as it seems, but he needs a couple of years to gain more experience, not making the same mistake that his father did. So basically, that was the idea behind the Salesforce initiative. And again, don't get distracted by the sales initiative too much. The underlying issues are the mismatch of roles, the informal leadership and formal leadership in the organization, and the relationship issues in the case, plus the neglectance of numbers, how it's going in the organization.